The first time this institution fought this hard to learn my name was when $340,000 was attached to my research proposal. My name is Dr. Catherine Mercer, 11 years on faculty, a publication record spanning 3 continents, a federal grant proposal co-led with the 2 strongest junior researchers in recent funding history. They had 14 weeks to ask me one question. They did not ask one question. At 7:51 in the morning, a 2-paragraph form letter arrived in my inbox, unsigned, except for a printed name beneath a scanned signature. It cited a protocol, subsection 4.7, that does not appear anywhere in the faculty handbook. I checked. It is not there. I read the letter once. Then I picked up 2 things. The blue folder under my arm, 2 inches of data I had labeled in my own handwriting the day I submitted the application 14 weeks ago, and the 7 months of files I had been building before that. The ones showing that 14 of the last 16 funded grants at this institution had gone to male faculty in the sciences. I walked to the elevator, I pressed 4, it was 2:09 in the afternoon. I had 141 minutes until the federal compliance filing closed. In his office, Dean Ashworth folded his hands on the desk the way men like him always do when they have already made the decision and are simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. He called me Catherine. I set my coffee down on the edge of his desk, very carefully, without a sound. He had no idea what was inside my bag. He thought this was where it ended. He was wrong about that. 7 months earlier, Dr. Catherine Mercer was sitting in her office on the 3rd floor of Whitmore Hall at 11:14 on a Wednesday night. The office was 118 square feet. She had measured it once, not out of frustration, but because she needed to know precisely how much space she had to work with. The desk was standard faculty issue, the surface worn down through 20 years of use before she inherited it. The overhead light had a flicker she had stopped noticing in her 3rd year. There were 4 filing cabinets against the far wall, all full. On the floor beside her chair, a canvas tote with a broken handle she kept meaning to replace containing a portable phone charger, 2 protein bars, and a set of color-coded folders she had bought at a Walgreens on Route 9 for $4.79. Outside, the campus was quiet. The last bus back to her apartment, 12 miles from Harwick, $1,475 a month, the cheapest 1-bedroom she had found within 40 minutes of campus, ran at midnight. She had 43 minutes. She was not thinking about the bus. On her screen was a spreadsheet. 5 years of Harwick University grant allocation data, every application received, every award granted, every denial issued, sorted by faculty name, department, gender, race, academic seniority level, and application amount. She had submitted the public records request 6 months ago. It had taken 11 weeks to arrive. When it did, it came with 3 pages of redactions and no explanation for what had been removed or why. She had worked around the redactions. The spreadsheet had 2,847 rows. She had cross-referenced it against publicly available faculty demographic data, salary records from the university's annual financial transparency report, and the publication histories of every single applicant over the 5-year period. She had spent $340 of her own money on a statistical analysis software license because the university's shared departmental license did not cover the regression modeling she needed. She had done most of the work between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., 4 nights a week for 26 weeks, because her teaching load, 4 courses, 112 students, 2 dissertation advisees, consumed everything before that. What she had found was not dramatic. That was the thing about data. The thing she taught her students every semester in quantitative methods. Data was never dramatic, it was just true. In 5 years, Harwick's Office of Academic Resource Management had approved 74 research grants totaling $11.2 million. Of those 74, exactly 61 had gone to male faculty. Of those 61, 49 had gone to men in STEM or business departments. The average award for a male applicant in the sciences was $187,000. The average award for a female applicant in the humanities and social sciences was $43,500. The overall approval rate for grant applications submitted by women was 22%. For men, it was 67%. None of that, standing alone, was proof of anything. Ashworth could explain every single number in isolation. She had listened to him explain numbers for 11 years. What she had also found, buried 3 layers deep in the cross-reference, invisible unless you were specifically looking for it, was a pattern in the language of the denial letters themselves. 41 of the 53 denial letters sent to female applicants over 5 years contained one of 3 identical phrases: resource classification issue, non-standard faculty access classification, or interdisciplinary resource reallocation protocol. The same language. Applied in 77.4% of denials issued to women. Applied in 11.2% of denials issued to men. She had stared at that number for a long time. Then she had opened a different document, a draft email addressed to the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, and she had attached 847 pages of supporting data, and she had pressed send at 12:03 a.m. on a Thursday in early March. The response had come 8 weeks later, not by email, by courier. To her department mailbox in a sealed envelope with a federal seal embossed on the upper left corner. It was a Tuesday morning. She had just walked out of her 9 a.m. Introduction to Macroeconomics lecture, still carrying her notes, still thinking about whether she had 20 minutes to eat before her 11 o'clock office hours. When she saw the envelope sitting in her faculty mailbox between a course catalog and a memo about parking enforcement, she stood in the hallway and opened it there. She read it once, slowly, from the salutation to the signature block at the bottom of the second page. Then she folded it along its original creases, placed it back in the envelope, slid the envelope into the front pocket of her laptop bag, the one with the replaced zipper, and zipped it closed. She did not call anyone. She did not take a photograph of it to send to someone. She walked to her office, ate a granola bar standing at her desk, and began pulling up her notes for the 11 o'clock. She had known, from the moment she felt the weight of the envelope in her hand, that she would go herself. She could have sent formal notification through the university's general counsel. She could have called Ashworth's office from her desk. She could have done this through any number of channels that would have been cleaner, quieter, far less likely to require her to sit across from the man and look him in the face. She needed to go herself. She needed to see whether the system behaved the same way when she walked through the door, the same way it had behaved for the 23 women whose application she had tracked across 5 years. She needed to see it with her own eyes, in real time, documented. As of 2:09 p.m., she had her answer. She had also 3 deadlines running simultaneously, and all 3 of them were immovable. The federal compliance filing for case number ED, OCR 2024-0892, closed at 4:30 p.m. If she missed it, the preliminary findings would be sealed under administrative review for 24 months. Ashworth would have 2 full years to restructure Harwick's grant allocation framework, realign the internal documentation, and ensure that by the time any federal investigator reviewed the numbers again, the pattern she had spent 7 months constructing from public data would no longer be visible in the figures he chose to report. At 6 p.m., the Harwick Board of Trustees would convene for its annual budget session. On the agenda, Dean Ashworth's Academic Resource Realignment Plan Item 7, Subpart C, the reallocation of $2.3 million in research funding currently distributed across 4 active programs, all 4 led by women, all 4 mid-cycle, all 4 carrying doctoral students who had built their dissertation timelines around that funding continuing. The plan had been quietly added to the agenda 6 weeks ago. She had learned about it from the minutes of a preliminary budget committee meeting, posted 3 days late on the university's internal portal, buried on page 14 of a 22-page document that most faculty would never read. And at 7:30 p.m., in room 204 of Harwick's Graduate Studies building, Maya Osei would stand at a podium in front of a dissertation committee and defend 5 years of doctoral research on informal labor market structures in sub-Saharan economies. Work that was meticulous, original, and genuinely important, and that no one in that room would be able to diminish no matter how long they tried. Maya had been Kat's advisee since the first week of the doctoral program. She had arrived 3 days after burying her father in Accra, a man who had worked night shifts for 11 years to wire her tuition money overseas, who had told her on a phone call 6 weeks before he died that he needed her to finish what they had both started together. She had shown up to their first advising meeting carrying a composition notebook and a pen and red-rimmed eyes, and she had not missed a single deadline in 4 years. Kat had promised to be in that room when Maya stood up. She had made the promise the week Maya started. She intended to keep it. The numbers were simple and brutal. 141 minutes to file. 3 hours and 51 minutes before the board vote locked the reallocation into the university's permanent budget. 5 hours and 21 minutes before a young woman who had earned everything she was about to receive walked to the front of a room and needed to see one familiar face. It was 2:09 p.m. The coffee was cold. She had not touched it. My father did not raise his voice once during the 9 months they tried to take everything from him. I was 13 years old, and I remember that more clearly than almost anything else from that year, more clearly than the November morning my mother told me what had happened, more clearly than the school counselor who pulled me out of 7th period English to ask how I was holding up, more clearly than the sound of my parents' voices through the wall late at night, low and even, the particular cadence of two people, problem-solving rather than grieving. What I remember most is the quiet. My father was a man who could fill a room with his presence without ever raising his volume, and during the 9 months that the Columbus City School District held a formal misconduct investigation against him, he became quieter than I had ever seen him. His name was Robert Mercer. He had been teaching high school economics at Jefferson Preparatory Academy for 14 years when a parent filed a complaint. I will not pretend the details were simple, because they were not. A student had failed an exam, the student's father was on the school board. The complaint alleged grade manipulation, professional misconduct, and a pattern of, and this was the phrase they used, the phrase I saw printed in the letter my mother left on the kitchen table one morning without realizing I could read it from the doorway, preferential and inconsistent application of academic standards. My father was placed on administrative leave on a Tuesday in October. He was 39 years old. He had $11,200 in a savings account, a mortgage, 1 car, and 2 children. He had never, in 14 years of teaching, received a disciplinary note of any kind. The first thing he did, the day after the leave was issued, was go to the library. Not to research the complaint. Not to find a lawyer, that came later, a woman named Elaine Dobbins who charged $175 an hour and whom my parents paid in 4 installments. He went to the library because he needed a printer that was not the school's printer and a database that was not behind the school's firewall. He spent 6 hours there. He came home with the cardboard box. For the next 9 months, my father built a record. He printed every email he had sent and received in the past 4 years, over 2,000 pages. He printed every graded assignment for every student he had taught in the period covered by the complaint. He printed the school's own published grading policies, the district's formal misconduct procedures, the state board's standards for educator conduct, and the publicly available meeting minutes from the last 3 school board sessions, in which the complaining parent had spoken at length about his interest in, and these were the exact words ensuring consistency in how standards are applied across student populations. My father kept everything in labeled folders inside that cardboard box. He did not talk about the case at dinner. He did not explain what he was doing when I found him at the kitchen table at midnight, reading through printed emails with a yellow highlighter. He looked up at me once, when I was standing in the doorway in my socks at 12:43 a.m. And he said, "Go to sleep, Kat," in the same voice he used when he told me to put my coat on or turn down my music, like what he was doing was simply what needed to be done. The night before the formal hearing, I could not sleep. I went downstairs at 11 p.m. and found him at the kitchen table, not reviewing documents, not going through the box, just sitting there with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking at nothing in particular. I sat down across from him. He looked at me for a long time. "Are you scared?" I asked. He thought about it. He was a man who thought before he answered, which is rarer than it sounds. "No," he said finally. "I know what's in that box. They don't." He paused. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, a slow half-rotation, like he was deciding whether to say the next thing. "The truth doesn't need to be loud," he said. "It just needs to be documented." The hearing lasted 2 days. My father spoke for 11 minutes. His lawyer spoke for the rest. On the third day, the district sent a letter that retracted the complaint in full, restored his position and back pay, and noted in the formal, bloodless language of institutional correspondence that the initial findings had been insufficiently supported by the available record. He went back to Jefferson Preparatory the following Monday. He taught there for 17 more years. He retired at 63 with a commendation from the district superintendent and a card signed by 412 former students, collected over 18 months by a girl named Destiny Holt, who had been in his junior economics class and was by that point in her second year of law school. He never talked about those 9 months in any way that suggested they had cost him anything, but I had been there. I had watched what it cost. I had watched him eat lunch alone at that kitchen table for 9 months because he could not afford to be seen having the wrong conversation with the wrong person at the wrong time. I had watched my mother's face when she opened the monthly bank statement, and the column on the right was shorter than the one on the left. I had watched my father sit in the dark at 11 p.m. the night before the hearing that would determine whether everything he had spent 14 years building would still exist by the time the sun came up. And I had watched him walk in the next morning in his good jacket, carrying that cardboard box, and sit down at the table and wait. I did not fully understand, at 13, what I was watching. I understood it now. What my father had taught me, not in a speech, not in a lesson, not in any single conversation I could point to and say, there, that is where it happened, was that documentation is not a defensive tool. It is the architecture of truth. You build it before you need it. You build it precisely and without announcement. You carry it with you into the room, and you let the weight of it do what no amount of anger ever could. Today was the day I would find out if he was right. It was 2:14 p.m., 136 minutes until the filing closed. I did not go back toward the elevator. I crossed the waiting area instead and walked to the end of the counter, the long administrative service window that ran the full width of the north wall of the Office of Academic Resource Management. There were 2 stations open. The woman at the right station, her nameplate read B. Ellison, Administrative Coordinator 2, was typing with the particular focused energy of someone performing busyness rather than work. At the left station, the window was unoccupied. A small placard on the counter read, "Please ring bell for service." There was no bell. I stood at the left station and waited. The young man I had noticed earlier was still at the right station. Standing closer now, I could see him more clearly. He was wearing a dark green jacket and a gray sweater underneath it, pressed collar visible at the neck. He had his student ID in one hand and a printed email in the other. The kind of institutional email that arrives with a case number in the subject line and 3 paragraphs of language that explain nothing while appearing to explain everything. His folder was on the counter in front of him, held open with one hand. Inside it, a printed confirmation of his fellowship award, a signed letter from his faculty advisor, and what appeared to be a financial aid disbursement schedule. It was 2:16 p.m. 134 minutes until the filing closed. "I'm just trying to understand what the discrepancy is," he said, quietly, carefully. The specific quiet of someone who had learned, somewhere along the way, that volume was a liability in rooms like this one. "The award letter says $18,500. That's what I budgeted for." That's what my advisor confirmed. B. Ellison continued typing. "The system flagged your enrollment classification. I've submitted a correction request. Standard processing time is 14 to 21 business days." This is the 3rd time in 14 months, he said, not with anger. With the weariness of someone who has had a conversation so many times that it no longer surprises them, which is its own kind of devastating. "I understand your frustration, B," Ellison said in a tone that suggested she did not. "The protocol." "Which protocol? What's the name of it?" She looked up from her screen for the first time, not at him, at the space slightly to the left of him, at a fixed point on the wall above his left shoulder. "The enrollment classification review process. It's standard procedure." "Could you send me a copy this afternoon?" He looked at his printed email. He looked back up. He opened his mouth. And then B. Ellison's phone rang, and she picked it up and turned 45 degrees in her chair and began speaking into the receiver. The young man stood there. He did not slam his folder on the counter. He did not raise his voice. He stood there with his student ID in his right hand and his printed award letter in his left, and he looked at the back of B. Ellison's chair, and something in the set of his shoulders told me this was not the first time he had stood exactly like this. I looked at the clock above the window. 2:18 p.m. 132 minutes until the filing closed. 3 hours and 42 minutes until the board voted on $2.3 million that did not belong to Ashworth to reallocate. 5 hours and 12 minutes before Maya stood at her podium. My phone had 3 unread messages. I had not looked at them. I looked at Darius Webb instead. At his left hand, where the edge of his printed award letter had begun to crease from being held too tightly for too long. At the single strip of fluorescent lighting above the service window that buzzed at a frequency just below the threshold of something you could specifically complain about. At Patricia Reeves still standing near the copy machine, who was now looking directly at me with an expression I recognized. The expression of someone who knows what is about to happen and is calculating what it will cost them if they are still in the room when it does. Is silence in the face of a pattern the same as participation in it? When a woman who has spent 7 months documenting a system watches that system operate in real time on a person standing 3 feet away from her, does the documentation in her bag obligate her to something more than watching? And if she acts, if she steps forward, right now, with 132 minutes left on a clock that will not stop, what exactly is she trading, and for whom? I set my laptop bag down on the counter at the left service station. I unzipped the front pocket, the one with the replaced zipper, and I took out the envelope. I did not open it yet. I pressed the flat of my palm against the counter and I said in the same voice I used in a lecture hall when I needed the back row to hear me without making it feel like I was projecting. "Excuse me." B. Ellison turned back from her phone call, looked at me, and held up one finger. I left my palm flat on the counter. I waited. At the right station, Darius Webb turned slightly and looked at me. Just for a moment. I did not look back at him. I kept my eyes on B. Ellison's desk and I kept my hand on the counter and I let the quiet settle over the entire width of that room like something with actual weight. It was 2:19 p.m. From the corner of the room, I heard the copy machine begin its slow, mechanical warm-up cycle. Patricia Reeves had pressed print. She was still there. B. Ellison ended her phone call at 2:21 p.m. She set the receiver down. She turned back to her screen. She typed 4 words. Then she looked up at me with the particular expression of someone who has managed difficult conversations so many times that they have stopped distinguishing between them. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "But first, could you finish with this gentleman?" I nodded toward Darius Webb without looking away from her face. "He's been waiting since before I came in." A pause. The kind that is too short to be called a hesitation and too long to be called nothing. "His case is in processing," she said. "I understand. I'm asking if you can finish the conversation you were having with him before your call." I kept my voice level, informational, the same tone I used when a student asked a question whose answer was already in the syllabus and I needed them to find it themselves. "He had a question about the protocol you referenced. I think it deserves a complete answer." B. Ellison looked at me, then she looked at Darius, then she looked back at me, then she looked at the envelope in my hand. She did not say anything for 3 seconds. "Mr. Webb," she said, and her voice had recalibrated slightly, not softer exactly, but more deliberate, the way people speak when they become aware that they are being observed. "As I said, your enrollment classification has triggered a standard review. The $18,500 disbursement has been administratively reassigned pending resolution." Darius put his student ID down on the counter. Carefully, like he was setting down something breakable. "Reassigned to what?" "To the General Institutional Research Reserve, pending reclassification." "That's my funding. I've been awarded that funding. My advisor signed off. The fellowship committee confirmed it in writing." He tapped his folder. "I have all of it right here. The system. This is the 3rd time." The quiet in his voice had not changed. The weariness had. It was deeper now, like something that had been compressed for a long time under a weight he had not asked to carry. "I had to borrow $600 from my mother in November because of the last delay. She's a school bus driver. She does not have $600 to lend me." He paused. "I just need you to tell me what the discrepancy actually is, in plain language. What specifically is wrong with my enrollment classification?" B. Ellison's hands returned to her keyboard. I'm not able to provide a detailed breakdown at the service window. You can submit a written inquiry to. I've submitted 2 written inquiries, he said, in November, and in March. I have the confirmation numbers. She typed something. She did not look up. It was 2:23 p.m. 107 minutes until the filing closed. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. Inside it, a 2-page federal appointment letter, a case number, a timestamp of 10:17 a.m. On a day 14 weeks ago, and the full weight of 7 months of work. Outside it, a 26-year-old man who had borrowed $600 from a school bus driver and was now standing in front of a service window being told to submit a 3rd written inquiry that would receive the same non-response as the first 2. I ran the numbers the way my father had taught me to run numbers, not emotionally, precisely. If I opened the envelope now, the element of surprise I had spent 7 months protecting would be spent. Ashworth would have, I checked the clock, 107 minutes to call his general counsel, restructure the conversation, and potentially delay the federal filing on procedural grounds. My attorney, a former OCR investigator named James Whitfield, who had reviewed every page of my data, and told me on a Tuesday morning over bad conference room coffee that this was one of the cleanest pattern cases he had seen in 19 years. James had been explicit. The filing needed to land before Ashworth knew it was coming. If I waited, I could still file. I could still meet the first deadline. I could stay in this waiting room, document what I was witnessing, and add it to a record that was already 847 pages long. It would be the right strategic decision. The clean decision. The decision that protected everything I had built. Darius Webb's mother drove a school bus. She had lent her son $600 in November because the institution where he was pursuing a doctorate had administratively reassigned his fellowship for the 2nd time. And neither the written inquiry he submitted that month nor the one he submitted in March had received a substantive response. This was the 3rd time. What does it mean to carry the documentation of a pattern and then watch the pattern happen right in front of you at 2:23 p.m. on a Thursday? And decide that the strategic value of waiting is worth more than the immediate cost paid by the person standing at the window? At what point does preparation become its own kind of permission for a system to keep operating exactly as designed? I looked at Darius Webb's hand. The edge of the printed award letter had torn slightly along the fold line, not from anger, from being held, from being carried into this room and the room before this room and, I understood now, the room before that one. From 14 months of being the documentation that nobody in an official capacity had chosen to actually read. He smoothed it, carefully, automatically, the way you smooth something you cannot afford to replace. I picked up my laptop bag. I did not weigh the rest of it. "Mr. Webb," I said. He turned. His expression was careful, the expression of someone who has learned not to assume that a stranger speaking their name is good news. "My name is Dr. Catherine Mercer. I'm a faculty member in the economics department." I set my bag on the counter beside his folder. I did not open the envelope yet. "Can I see your disbursement confirmation?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he reached into his folder and handed it to me. I read it. Award letter dated September 4th. Fellowship ID number, faculty advisor signature. Disbursement schedule, September 15th, January 15th, May 15th. Total annual award, $18,500. Funded through the Harwick University Graduate Research Fellowship Fund, account 4471GR. I looked up at B. Ellison. "This disbursement is funded through account 4471GR, I said. "That account is not subject to enrollment classification review under any protocol I'm aware of in the 2024 Faculty Handbook or the Graduate Studies Financial Aid Guidelines. Can you show me the specific policy language that authorizes the administrative reassignment of funds from that account based on an enrollment flag?" B. Ellison's hand stopped on her keyboard. "The Interdisciplinary Resource Reallocation Protocol." Subsection 4.7, I said. "Yes. Dean Ashworth mentioned that to me as well, upstairs, about 20 minutes ago." I kept my voice entirely pleasant. "I've asked for the document. I haven't received it yet. In the meantime, I'm asking you, is there a written policy that specifically authorizes the reassignment of funds from account 4471GR accounts based on enrollment classification flags?" The waiting room had gotten quieter. Not suddenly. Gradually. The way noise in a room decreases when people stop pretending they are not listening. B. Ellison picked up her phone. She dialed a 4-digit extension. She turned 45 degrees in her chair. I looked at Darius. He was looking at me with an expression I could not entirely read, something between wariness and something else, something that had not been there 30 seconds ago. I looked at my phone. 3 messages, still unread. The screen had gone dark. It was 2:31 p.m., 99 minutes until the filing closed. Leonard Ashworth arrived at 2:38 p.m. He did not walk quickly. Men like Ashworth never walked quickly. It implied that something had happened that was not within their control. He moved through the door of the Office of Academic Resource Management with the measured pace of someone who had been summoned to handle a situation that he was entirely confident he could handle. He saw me. He stopped for exactly 1 step, then he continued walking. Catherine. He used my first name again. It was a tool he deployed with the same unconscious precision as everything else. I was told there was a question about a student disbursement. There is, I said. Mr. Webb's fellowship disbursement from account 4471GR has been administratively reassigned for the 3rd time in 14 months. I've asked for the written policy language that authorizes that under subsection 4.7 of the Interdisciplinary Resource Reallocation Protocol. I haven't been able to locate it in the 2024 Faculty Handbook or the Graduate Studies Financial Guidelines. Ashworth looked at Darius, then back at me. His expression did not change. It was the expression of a man who had spent 19 years learning how to be unreadable in exactly this kind of room. These are 2 separate matters, he said. Your application was reviewed and determined under the appropriate committee process. Mr. Webb's disbursement is an administrative enrollment matter that is being handled through standard procedure. I understand they are procedurally separate, I said. I'm asking about the policy document. Sandra will get that to you. You mentioned that upstairs. It's been 29 minutes. Something shifted in his face, not visibly, but I had watched Leonard Ashworth's face in faculty meetings for 11 years. I knew what the absence of a microexpression looked like on a man who had very good control of his microexpressions. He turned to B. Ellison. He said something low enough that I could not hear it. B. Ellison typed something. She pressed enter. My phone screen lit up on the counter. 3 messages, all at once. I looked down. The first was from James Whitfield at Whitfield & Associates, sent at 2:39 p.m. It read, Cat, OCR portal closes at 4:30 sharp. No extensions. System is slow today. Upload now if you can. Don't wait. The second was from Dr. Renata Okafor, Faculty Senate Chair, also at 2:39 p.m. It read, Board session moved up. Now 5:45, not 6. Ashworth's item is first on agenda. Cat, where are you? The third was from Maya, also at 2:39 p.m. It said, Dr. Mercer, just wanted to make sure you're still coming tonight. No pressure if something came up. I know you're busy. It's okay if you can't make it. I read all 3 in the time it took Ashworth to turn back around. I did not answer any of them. The board session had moved up, 75 minutes earlier than I had planned. Ashworth's item was first, which meant that if the filing was not submitted before the board voted, and the board voted before 5:45 p.m., the $2.3 million reallocation would be a line item in Harwick's official budget before a single federal finding had been entered into the public record. I looked at the clock above the service window. 2:41 p.m. 109 minutes until the filing deadline. Not 99. The portal closed at 4:30, not 4:30 by the time I finished uploading. James was right. I needed to be at a computer with a reliable connection inside the next 40 minutes if I wanted any margin at all. Maya's message was still on my screen. It's okay if you can't make it. She had written that for my benefit. I knew her well enough to know that. She had written it so I would not feel the weight of the thing she actually needed because she had been doing that, absorbing other people's discomfort so they would not have to carry it. Since the week she arrived with red-rimmed eyes and a composition notebook and 4 years of work ahead of her that she was going to finish regardless of whether anyone showed up. Ashworth was saying something about enrollment systems and administrative timelines. I was not listening. I was looking at the fold line on Darius Webb's printed award letter where the paper had torn slightly from 14 months of being carried. I was thinking about a cardboard box on a kitchen table at midnight. I was thinking about my father's voice. The truth doesn't need to be loud. Ashworth finished whatever he was saying. He looked at me with the patient, settled expression of a man who had just explained something clearly and was waiting for the clarity to land. I looked at him. I unzipped the front pocket of my laptop bag. I took out the envelope. Is the moment before you stop performing patience and begin performing consequence the same moment? Is there a distance between, I have been watching this for 7 months, and I am no longer willing to watch it, and if so, what lives in that distance? And what does it mean that the thing that finally closed it was not a policy or a deadline or a federal appointment letter, but a torn piece of paper in the hands of a 26-year-old man who had learned to smooth it automatically without anger, without ceremony, the way you smooth something you cannot afford to replace? I set the envelope on the counter. I looked at Leonard Ashworth. I think, I said, we should find a conference room. He looked at the envelope, at the federal seal embossed on the upper left corner, at my face. For the first time in 11 years, he did not reach for words immediately. In the corner of the room, Patricia Reeves had gone very still. The copy machine had stopped. It was 2:43 p.m. 87 minutes until the filing closed. The conference room on the 4th floor of Administration Hall was called the Whitmore Room, named after the same man whose name was on the building where I kept my office. A 19th-century trustee whose portrait hung in the main lobby with the particular stillness of someone who had never expected to be questioned. The room had a long mahogany table, 8 chairs, Venetian blinds on the south-facing windows that admitted late-afternoon light in narrow stripes, and a wall-mounted monitor that nobody had turned on in what appeared to be several months. Based on the fine layer of dust on the input panel, Ashworth took the chair at the head of the table. I sat 2 seats to his left, which placed me precisely at the midpoint of the table, which placed the window light directly behind me and the monitor directly behind him. I did not choose that seat deliberately. I noted afterward that I had. Ellison had followed us in and was standing near the door, a legal pad in her hands. Darius Webb was not in the room. I had asked him, quietly, at the service window, to wait in the waiting area. I had said, "This will not take long." He had looked at me for a moment, that same careful look, the one that had not yet decided what it was seeing, and then he had nodded and gone back to the vinyl chair nearest the window. Patricia Reeves was not in the room either. I had seen her, in the doorway of the waiting area, make the calculation. I had watched her look at the conference room door, then down at the papers in her hands, then back at the conference room door. I had not made it easier for her. I had not nodded at her or gestured or in any way suggested that her presence was required. That was her decision to make without my assistance. Ashworth folded his hands on the table. He had recovered his composure entirely during the 2-minute walk from the service window to the conference room. He looked like a man who had decided that whatever was inside that envelope was manageable. "Catherine," he said, "I want to approach this constructively. If you have concerns about the grant review process, there are formal channels." "I know the channels," I said. "I've used them. That's not why we're here." I placed the envelope on the table. I opened it. I took out the 2-page letter and laid it flat on the mahogany surface, oriented so that the text faced him. I smoothed it once along the fold line. Then I placed my hands in my lap and I waited while he read it. He read the first paragraph. I watched the muscles in his jaw. He read the second paragraph. I watched his hands, which were still folded on the table, press slightly harder against each other. He reached the signature block at the bottom of the second page. "This is U.S.," he began. U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, I said. Case number ED OCR 2024-0892. My appointment as lead federal investigator was confirmed on March 14th at 10:17 a.m. The appointment carries full statutory authority under Title VI and Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 to access, review, and act upon Harwich University's internal financial records, grant allocation data, email correspondence, and administrative decision logs for any period within the last 5 years. I paused. That is what the letter says. I am not summarizing, I am reading. Ashworth looked up from the letter. He looked at me the way people look at something when they are recalculating the entire geometry of the room they are sitting in. I opened my laptop. "I want to walk you through the data," I said. because I think it is important that you understand not what I believe, but what the record shows. I turned the screen toward him. In the 5 academic years between 2019 and 2024, the Office of Academic Resource Management, which reports directly to your office, approved 74 research grants totaling $11.2 million. Of those 74 approvals, 61 went to male faculty. That is an approval rate of 67% for male applicants. The approval rate for female applicants over the same period was 22%. I let that number sit for 3 full seconds. The difference in average award amount between male applicants in the sciences and female applicants in the humanities and social sciences was $143,500 per grant. Those are the aggregate numbers. They are drawn from Harwick's own publicly reported financial data, cross-referenced against faculty demographic records that are also publicly available. Ashworth opened his mouth. "I'm not finished," I said, not sharply. "The way you say I'm not finished when you are explaining the terms of a contract to someone who has agreed to hear them," I scrolled. "The pattern I want to draw your attention to is in the denial language. Of the 53 denial letters sent to female applicants over 5 years, 41, that is 77.4%, contained one of 3 identical phrases. Resource classification issue. Non-standard faculty access classification. Interdisciplinary Resource Reallocation Protocol, subsection 4.7. I looked up. The same 3 phrases appear in 11.2% of denial letters sent to male applicants. That is a differential in application rate of 66.2 percentage points, applied consistently, across 5 years, across 4 different department budget cycles, across 3 separate grant committees, all of which report to the same administrative office, which reports to you. The Venetian blind light moved slightly as a cloud passed outside. "What that means, Dean Ashworth," I said, "is that the language you used with me this afternoon and the language your staff used with Mr. Webb at the service window is not incidental. It is a pattern. It is a documented, statistically significant, cross-referenced pattern that appears in your office's own records and that I have spent 7 months building into an 847-page evidentiary file that was submitted to the Office for Civil Rights on March 14th along with my appointment request." I closed the laptop. The federal compliance filing for this case closes at 4:30 p.m. today. At that time, the preliminary findings become part of the public OCR record. What happens between now and 4:30 does not change that. I paused. What happens between now and 4:30 does determine what the record shows about how Harwick's administration responded when the findings were presented. Ashworth said nothing. For the first time in 11 years, Leonard Ashworth said nothing. Not because he lacked words. He had never lacked words. He said nothing because the particular kind of language he had spent 19 years perfecting, the language of procedure and protocol and institutional standards, had just been picked up, sorted, cross-referenced, and handed back to him as evidence. "You set this up," he said finally. His voice was quiet, level. But the certainty had gone out of it the way air goes out of something punctured slowly. "Today, coming here, you wanted me to. I submitted a $340,000 research grant application through the standard faculty process," I said. "I came to this office today to inquire about the denial. I requested the policy document that authorized the denial language. I have not yet received it." I looked at him directly. "The rest was your office's process operating exactly as it operates." He looked at the letter on the table. I let him look at it. "There is a second matter," I said. I turned the laptop back toward myself. I pulled up a second document, the grant allocation data for account 4471GR, the Graduate Research Fellowship Fund, 5 years of disbursement records sorted by recipient, department, and delay frequency. Darius Webb is a second-year doctoral student in the sociology department. His fellowship award of $18,500 per academic year is funded through account 4471GR. He has experienced administrative disbursement delays in 3 separate award cycles over 14 months. The delay rationale cited in each case has been an enrollment classification flag. I scrolled to a highlighted column. Account 4471GR disbursements to doctoral students in the sociology, African American Studies, and Education departments have experienced an average administrative delay of 34 days per cycle. Disbursements to doctoral students in economics, finance, and engineering have experienced an average administrative delay of 3.2 days per cycle. I looked up. Same account, same fund, same institution. Ashworth was looking at the screen. "This isn't about today, Dean Ashworth," I said. "Today is simply the day someone was in the room with the data and the federal authority to act on it." I closed the laptop. I turned to B. Ellison, who had not moved from her position near the door and whose legal pad remained entirely blank. "I need Mr. Webb's disbursement released today," I said. "Full amount. Account 4471GR has the funds. The enrollment flag has no documented policy basis in any current Harwick Administrative Handbook. Please process the release before the end of business." I kept my tone the same as it had been for the last 14 minutes, informational, unhurried, entirely clear. "I'll need a confirmation number." B. Ellison looked at Ashworth. Ashworth looked at the federal appointment letter, still lying flat on the mahogany table, the gold seal of the Department of Education visible from across the room. He nodded, once. B. Ellison left the room. I looked back at Ashworth. "Fairness is not only a moral principle in institutional research environments," I said. "The data is unambiguous on this. Institutions that apply equitable resource allocation frameworks consistently outperform those that rely on discretionary administrative judgment in grant decisions, in research output, faculty retention, doctoral completion rates, and federal funding competitiveness." I'll include the relevant literature in the OCR submission. I paused. "I'll also include today's interaction in the supplemental documentation, the specific language used, the timeline, the response." He looked at me. "I'd encourage you to be present at the Board of Trustees session this evening," I said. "Specifically for Item 7, Subpart C, the Academic Resource Realignment Plan." I stood up. I placed the federal letter back in its envelope. I zipped the front pocket of my laptop bag closed. It would be my recommendation that Item 7 be tabled pending the outcome of the OCR review. That recommendation and the reason for it will be available to the board in writing before 5 p.m. I picked up my bag. I looked at Leonard Ashworth one final time. He was sitting very still at the head of the long mahogany table, the Venetian blind light crossing his hands in narrow stripes, looking at the space where the letter had been. "I'll see myself out," I said. I walked to the door. I opened it. I did not look back. Darius Webb was still in the vinyl chair nearest the window. He stood when he saw me come through the conference room door. His folder was in his hands. His printed award letter, the one with the torn fold line, was on top. I stopped in front of him. "B. Ellison is processing your disbursement release," I said. "Full amount, today. Ask for a written confirmation number before you leave." I looked at his folder. "Keep everything in there. Every email, every confirmation, every case number. Label it and keep it somewhere that isn't your inbox." I paused. "If there is a fourth delay, call this number." I wrote James Whitfield's direct line on the back of one of my faculty business cards and handed it to him. "Tell him I said to take the call." He looked at the card. He looked up at me. "Why?" he said. It was a real question, not rhetorical, not suspicious, just real. "Because your mother lent you $600, I said, "and she shouldn't have had to." It was not a complete answer. He seemed to know that. He nodded once, slowly, and then he looked back down at the card. It was 3:04 p.m., 86 minutes until the filing closed. I turned toward the exit. Patricia Reeves was standing in the hallway, not near the copy machine, not in the waiting area, in the hallway 6 feet from the elevator bank. With her back against the wall and her papers held against her chest and the expression of someone who has been standing in a hallway long enough to understand what they were really doing there. I stopped. We looked at each other. "I should have said something," she said. 2 years ago, when I first saw the numbers." Her voice was very quiet. "I was waiting for tenure. I'm still waiting for tenure." She paused. "That's not a good enough reason." "No," I said, "it isn't." She flinched slightly. She had expected, I think, something softer. I did not have something softer. What I had was 86 minutes and 3 things I needed to do. And the kind of tiredness that comes not from today but from 11 years of watching people stand in hallways like this one and wait for a reason that would finally feel sufficient. The OCR case file has a supplemental witness testimony section, I said. If you have documentation, emails, records, anything you saved, James Whitfield's office is accepting submissions through next Friday. I looked at her directly. That is a harder thing to do than staying in the hallway, I know that. I'm telling you because it is available, not because I'm going to tell you what to do with it. She nodded. Her hands had tightened on the papers against her chest. Cat, W.A. I have to go, I said. I pressed the elevator button. In the waiting area behind me, I heard B. Ellison's voice, different in register than it had been 40 minutes ago, slower, more careful, reading a confirmation number aloud. I heard Darius Webb say, "Can you repeat that? I want to write it down." Near the elevator, a young man in a Harwick sweatshirt was lowering his phone. He had been standing near the second row of chairs for the last 15 minutes. I had noticed him the way you notice something at the edge of your field of vision and file it without examination. He was looking at the screen of his phone now, then at the door of the conference room, then at his screen again. His thumb was moving. The elevator arrived. I stepped in. I pressed L for lobby. As the doors closed, I took out my phone. I opened my messages. I found Maya's. "It's okay if you can't make it." I typed 4 words. "I'm on my way." I hit send. Then I opened the OCR portal on my phone, confirmed my upload credentials, and began moving the 847-page file from my secure cloud drive to the submission queue. The portal's progress bar appeared. It was 3:07 p.m. The elevator descended. In my mind, not triumph, not relief, not the particular satisfaction I had spent 7 months imagining might live on the other side of this. What was there instead was quieter than I expected. More like the moment after a long, difficult equation finally balances, not joy exactly, but the clean, functional recognition that the numbers came out right, that the record was what it needed to be, that the box had been carried into the room and set on the table and opened, and underneath that, persistent and specific, a composition notebook, red-rimmed eyes, 4 years of work. A man in Accra who had wired tuition money overseas on a night shift schedule for 11 years so that his daughter could stand in front of a committee at 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday and defend every page of it. The lobby doors opened. I walked through them into the late afternoon where the light was long and amber across the Harwick campus quad, where students moved between buildings with the unhurried pace of people who did not yet know what had happened in Administration Hall, where the oak trees along the east path were beginning to go gold at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with any of this, and everything to do with why any of it mattered. The upload was at 34%. I had 83 minutes. I walked. 3 months later, Darius Webb defended his second-year research portfolio on a Wednesday morning in December in a seminar room on the 3rd floor of the Graduate Studies building. The committee had 4 members. He spoke for 41 minutes without notes. When it was over, his faculty advisor, a woman named Dr. Constance Hall, who had been at Harwick for 22 years and had a reputation for not saying things she did not mean, told him it was the strongest second-year presentation she had seen in a decade. He was sitting in his apartment when she said it. A studio, $780 a month, 14 minutes from campus by bicycle. He had moved in 6 weeks earlier, the first time in 2 years he had been able to sign a lease without calculating whether the fellowship disbursement would arrive before the rent was due. He called his mother that night. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did after 9 p.m. when she was home from her shift and the house was quiet. He did not tell her everything, he told her enough. She listened the way she always listened, without interrupting, without filling the silence, the way you listen when you have learned over a long time that the most important things are usually in the pauses. When he finished, she said, "I knew you'd get there." He kept Dr. Catherine Mercer's business card in the front pocket of the folder he now labeled, "Financial Records, Keep All." He had not needed to use it. He thought sometimes that was partly the point. Dr. Patricia Reeves submitted a 14-page witness testimony to James Whitfield's office on a Friday afternoon, 9 days after the events in Administration Hall. She submitted it from her own laptop, from her own email address, under her own name. She did not ask anyone for permission. She did not tell anyone she was doing it until after she had pressed send. The submission contained 11 documented instances she had personally witnessed over 3 years, grant committee conversations, she had been present for email exchanges she had been copied on. A faculty meeting in which the phrase resource classification issue had been used twice in reference to proposals from women and 0 times in reference to proposals from men, all within the same 40-minute session. She had kept records. She had kept them because some part of her had known for a long time that she was going to need them for something. She had told herself, for 2 years, that the something would eventually become clear on its own. What she understood now, with the particular clarity that arrives too late to be comfortable and too early to be dismissed, was that the something had been clear for a long time. She had simply been waiting for a version of it that did not cost her anything. Her tenure review was rescheduled. The new timeline added 11 months. She did not withdraw the testimony, she still kept the records. She kept more of them now. It did not make the 11 months feel shorter. She did not expect it to. Dean Leonard Ashworth was placed on administrative leave pending investigation on November 3, 41 days after the OCR preliminary findings entered the public record. The investigation was conducted by an independent review panel appointed jointly by Harwick's Board of Trustees and the Office for Civil Rights. It was not fast. Due process is not fast. The panel reviewed 4,200 pages of internal documentation, conducted interviews with 37 faculty members across 9 departments, and issued an interim report in February that identified systemic irregularities in grant allocation procedures across 4 consecutive budget cycles. The interim report did not use the word discrimination. It used the phrase statistically significant and procedurally unsubstantiated differential outcomes, which is, in the language of federal institutional review, the same thing. Ashworth's final employment status was pending as of the date these events were recorded. The investigation continued. That is how accountability works when it works correctly, not as punishment delivered in a single room on a Thursday afternoon, but as process, slow and documented and unglamorous, arriving at conclusions that the record had already made inevitable. The Interdisciplinary Resource Reallocation Protocol, subsection 4.7, was formally removed from Harwick's administrative framework on October 22. The policy had never appeared in any faculty handbook. It had never been formally approved by any governance body. It had existed for an indeterminate number of years, only in the language of denial letters and the institutional confidence of the people who wrote them. Harwick University's Office of Academic Resource Management released its first ever public grant allocation equity report in January. The numbers were not flattering, they were accurate. The report documented the 5-year differential outcomes, outlined a new blind review process for grant applications above $50,000, established an independent faculty ombudsperson position with direct reporting authority to the Board of Trustees, and committed to annual public reporting of allocation data disaggregated by faculty, gender, race department, and seniority level. In the first grant cycle under the new framework, 63 applications reviewed, awards totaling $4.1 million. The approval rate differential between male and female applicants was 6 percentage points, not 0. The report said so explicitly and noted that 6 percentage points remained a gap requiring continued examination. It was not PR. It was a number attached to a commitment, attached to a public record that anyone could access and hold the institution to in the following cycle. 4 other research universities formally requested access to Harwick's new review framework within 60 days of the report's publication. 2 of them had received OCR inquiries of their own in the previous 18 months. The Carver Initiative grant was approved in the emergency funding cycle of November, retroactive to the original application date. $340,000 over 3 years. 2 junior faculty researchers. A combined publication record that had not changed since Kat first submitted the application 14 weeks before everything in Administration Hall. The video reached 2.3 million views in 11 days. The young man in the Harwick sweatshirt had uploaded it the same evening. 47 seconds, no caption. Just the conference room door visible in the background, the sound of B. Ellison's voice reading a confirmation number, and Darius Webb. His folder in his hands, his printed award letter on top saying clearly, into the administrative quiet of a waiting room that had not expected to be recorded. Can you repeat that? I want to write it down. A congressional subcommittee on higher education equity cited the video in a formal inquiry letter sent to 47 universities in November. 3 state legislatures introduced grant allocation transparency bills before the end of the year. The bills were in various stages of committee review. Whether they would pass was a different question, with a different timeline and a different kind of uncertainty. Dr. Turrell. Catherine Mercer was not at Harwick on the day the equity report was published. She had hired a deputy director for the OCR implementation oversight, a woman named Dr. Simone Banks, who had spent 8 years at the Department of Education and who understood federal compliance frameworks with the particular fluency of someone who had built several of them from the ground up. Simone ran the day-to-day. Kat reviewed the reporting. The arrangement suited both of them. On the day the report went public, Kat was in a seminar room at Georgetown, presenting the statistical methodology behind the 847-page evidentiary file to a graduate seminar in quantitative policy research. The students were second years. They had good questions. She stayed 40 minutes past the scheduled end of the session because the questions kept being worth answering. She still had the Canvas laptop bag. The zipper on the front pocket had been replaced a third time, in November, at a tailor's shop 2 blocks from her apartment. $8. She had not replaced the bag. From that Thursday afternoon in October, she had kept one thing that was not in any document or filing or dataset. It was not the federal letter. It was not the confirmation number B. Ellison read aloud. It was a question she had not been able to answer then and could not entirely answer now. At what point had she stopped thinking of the data as preparation and started thinking of it as permission? Permission to wait, to be strategic. To hold the weight of 7 months of work while a 26-year-old man stood at a service window and smoothed a torn piece of paper that he could not afford to replace? She did not know the answer. She thought about it on mornings when she was reading a student's data set and could see the thing the student could not yet see. She thought about it when she was reviewing the quarterly reporting from Simone's office and the numbers were better than last year, but not good enough. She thought about it on the evening she spent building the next evidentiary file because there was a next one. There was always a next one. And the city outside her window was dark, and the lamp on her desk was on, and the work was the work, and the question was still there, open, unanswered, the way the most important questions tend to be, at 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday in October in room 204 of the Harwick Graduate Studies building. Maya Osei had stood at a podium in front of a dissertation committee and defended 5 years of research on informal labor market structures in sub-Saharan economies. She had spoken for 53 minutes. The committee had deliberated for 22. Kat had been in the third row, on the left, with her laptop bag on the floor beside her chair and a cup of coffee she had not touched since she sat down. When the committee chair said passed with distinction, Maya had looked up from her notes and her eyes had found Kat's across the room, and something in her face had opened in a way that had nothing to do with the committee's language and everything to do with 4 years of work and a man in Accra who had needed her to finish what they had started. Kat had nodded once. Maya had nodded back. That was the part she kept. She proved that the documentation of a pattern is itself an act of power. She proved that the language institutions use to deny people what they have earned can be turned, with precision and patience, into the evidence that holds those institutions to account. She proved that 7 months of work in a 118-square-foot office at midnight, funded by $340 of her own money and sustained by the memory of a man at a kitchen table with a cardboard box, can change the numbers that determine what 4 research programs survive and which 26-year-old doctoral student can afford to pay rent. Those things happened. They are in the record. But she also proved something that is harder to say out loud in a story like this one. She only won because she had a federal appointment letter with a gold seal and a case number and statutory authority under Title VI and Title IX. She only won because she had 7 months and a statistical software license and a former OCR investigator who charged by the hour and a faculty position that, however under-resourced, gave her 11 years of institutional standing to build from. She only won because, when she walked into that office, she was carrying something that the system had not yet found a protocol to dismiss. What about everyone who walks through that same door without the letter? What about the doctoral student who does not happen to be standing at a service window on the same Thursday as a federal investigator? What about the faculty member who files the written inquiry in November and again in March and does not hear back? And does not have 7 months of data and a legal contact and the specific combination of expertise and access and documentation that turns a pattern into a case? How many institutions have a subsection 4.7 that has never been challenged? Not because it was unchallengeable, but because the person who could have challenged it was too exhausted or too exposed. Or too alone at midnight in a too small office without a software license and a quiet certainty that the box was worth building. How many of those people are building the box right now, in offices like hers, on their own time, with their own money, waiting for a Thursday when everything lines up? And what does it say about what we have built? That the story we tell most often is the one where it lines up, not the thousands of Thursdays where it doesn't, not the folders that never become cases. Not the smoothed, torn award letters that never get a confirmation number read back to them. The truth doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be documented. What we have not yet figured out is how to make sure that everyone who is documenting it has somewhere to take it when the box is finally full. At Revenge Summit, we don't soften the emotion or dilute the message. We tell powerful fictional stories inspired by real-world issues that too many people face in silence. If today's story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, or made you see something you couldn't unsee, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because the conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning.